The sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Bentonville, Arkansas, and Delilah Crawford dropped flat behind a water trough, her sewing basket tumbling from her hands and spilling thread across the wooden planks. It was July 1878, and she had arrived in this frontier town less than an hour ago, stepping off the afternoon stagecoach with nothing but her skills as a seamstress and a heart full of desperate hope for a fresh start. When the shooting stopped and the dust settled, Delilah cautiously lifted her head to see a tall figure stumbling from the saloon across the street. He clutched his side, and even from this distance, she could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. The man wore typical cowboy attire, worn leather chaps over dusty trousers, boots that had seen better days, and a hat that shadowed his face. He staggered 3 more steps before collapsing in the middle of the road. The other townspeople scattered like frightened quail, disappearing into doorways and around corners. Delilah had learned enough about frontier life to know that folks avoided trouble when they could. But her hands moved before her mind could object, gathering her scattered supplies back into her basket. She hurried across the street, her simple blue calico dress swirling around her ankles as she knelt beside the fallen man. His eyes flickered open, revealing a striking green color that seemed at odds with the harsh landscape around them. Blood seeped between his fingers where he pressed them against his side. The wound appeared to be a graze rather than a direct hit, but it needed tending nonetheless. "Let me help you," Delilah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can you stand if I support you?" He studied her face for a long moment as if trying to determine whether she was real or some fever dream. Then he gave a slight nod. "The boarding house, 2 streets over." Together they managed to get him upright, his arm heavy across her shoulders. He was considerably taller than her own 5'4", and the weight of him made her knees shake, but she held firm. They made their way slowly down the street, past buildings that still looked rough and unfinished, their wood not yet weathered gray by the elements. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a sagging porch and windows that needed washing. An older woman with steel gray hair appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to resignation when she saw them. "Quincy Wells, what have you gotten yourself into now?" the woman asked, though she held the door open wider and gestured toward the stairs. "Just a misunderstanding at the card table, Mrs. Porter," Quincy said through gritted teeth. "This kind lady helped me home." "I am Delilah Crawford," Delilah introduced herself quickly. "I am a seamstress newly arrived, but I have some experience with wound care. If you have clean water and bandages, I can help." Mrs. Porter looked her up and down, taking in the practical dress, the worn but serviceable boots, and the basket still clutched in Delilah's free hand. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. "3rd door on the left upstairs. I will bring supplies." Getting Quincy up those stairs proved to be an ordeal. By the time they reached his room, both of them were breathing hard. The space was sparse, containing only a narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk, and a single chair positioned by the window. Delilah helped him sit on the edge of the bed, then moved to open the window for fresh air. "You should not have helped me," Quincy said quietly. "People saw you. They will talk." "Let them talk," Delilah replied, turning back to face him. "I have survived worse than gossip." Something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps, or curiosity. But Mrs. Porter arrived with a basin of water, clean rags, and strips of cloth for bandaging, ending the moment before it could develop further. "I will leave you to it," the landlady said. "But Miss Crawford, you mind yourself. Quincy here is not a bad man, but trouble does seem to find him regular." When they were alone, Delilah rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside the bed. "I need to see the wound. Can you remove your shirt?" Quincy's hands fumbled with the buttons, still shaking from blood loss and shock. After watching him struggle for a moment, Delilah gently moved his hands aside and unbuttoned the shirt herself. Her fingers worked quickly and efficiently, the same dexterity that made her skilled with a needle now applied to this different task. The shirt fell away, revealing a lean, muscular torso marked with old scars. The fresh wound cut across his ribs on the left side, a deep graze that bled freely but had missed anything vital. Delilah cleaned it carefully, her touch as gentle as she could manage while still being thorough. Quincy remained silent throughout, though she felt his muscles tense under her fingers. "You have done this before," he observed when she began wrapping the bandage around his torso. "My father was a doctor in Missouri," Delilah said. "Before he died, I assisted him often. Hold still, I need to tie this off." The intimacy of the moment was not lost on either of them. Her hands pressed against his bare skin as she secured the bandage, and she could feel the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. When she finished and stepped back, her cheeks felt warm. "Thank you," Quincy said, meeting her eyes. "I owe you a debt." "You owe me nothing," Delilah replied, gathering the soiled rags into the basin. "Though if you have any mending that needs doing, I am looking for work. I plan to set up as a seamstress here in Bentonville." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I have plenty of mending. A cowboy's clothes take a beating on the range. But are you sure you want your first customer to be the man half the town saw you dragging out of trouble?" "I am not afraid of hard work or difficult circumstances," Delilah said. She lifted her chin slightly, a gesture that suggested she had faced challenges before and survived them. "Besides, I suspect you have a story worth hearing, Quincy Wells." "Most stories in this territory are not happy ones," he replied, his expression growing distant. "Mine included." Delilah set the basin aside and moved to sit in the chair by the window. The afternoon sun slanted through the glass, illuminating dust motes in the air between them. "I did not come here looking for happy stories. I came here to make a living and perhaps find some peace. If helping you costs me a few customers who are too concerned with appearances, then they were not customers I wanted anyway." "You are either very brave or very foolish," Quincy said. "Perhaps both," Delilah admitted, "but I am also very stubborn. Now rest. I will check on you tomorrow to change that bandage." She stood and collected her basket but paused at the door. "Your shirt is ruined. I will bring you a replacement when I return." Before he could protest, she slipped out of the room and made her way back down the stairs. Mrs. Porter waited at the bottom, her arms crossed over her ample bosom. "You planning to stay in Bentonville, Miss Crawford?" "I am," Delilah confirmed. "Then you should know that Quincy Wells is a good man who has had bad luck. His wife died 2 years back, along with their baby daughter. Fever took them both within 3 days of each other. He has been drifting ever since, working odd jobs, drinking too much, and getting into scrapes like today. He used to be foreman at the Double R Ranch before his world fell apart." The information settled over Delilah like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, the distant look in Quincy's eyes made more sense, as did the scars that clearly were not all physical. "Thank you for telling me. I tell you so you understand what you are involving yourself with," Mrs. Porter continued. "That man is broken inside in ways that are harder to mend than any bullet wound. All the more reason he needs someone willing to try," Delilah said quietly. Mrs. Porter studied her again with those sharp eyes. "You running from something, Miss Crawford?" "We are all running from something out here, are we not?" Delilah replied, not quite answering the question. "Do you know of any place I might rent for a reasonable price? I need somewhere to set up my business." "Old Miller's place, 2 streets over near the general store. He died last month and his widow moved back east to live with her sister." The building is small but sturdy, and it has living quarters in the back. Speak to Harvey at the bank. He is handling the property." Delilah thanked her and stepped out into the fading afternoon light. The town of Bentonville spread before her, rough and raw as the land that surrounded it. Wooden buildings lined dirt streets, and horses stood tied to hitching posts outside the various establishments. In the distance, she could see the rolling hills of the Ozarks, their slopes covered in oak and hickory trees that would turn brilliant colors come autumn. She found the bank easily enough and spoke with Harvey, a balding man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. The rent was reasonable, and when she showed him the money she had carefully saved over the past 3 years, he agreed to a 6-month lease with an option to purchase if her business proved successful. The building was indeed small, a single room with a back area that held a potbelly stove, a narrow bed, and space enough for a small table and chair. But it had good light from 2 large windows that faced the street, and the door had a solid lock. Delilah stood in the center of the space and felt something unfurl in her chest, something that might have been hope. She spent the rest of the afternoon sweeping and scrubbing, making the place habitable. Her possessions fit into a single trunk that the stagecoach driver had left at the general store. She retrieved it and unpacked her few belongings, her sewing supplies, several lengths of fabric she had brought with her, her mother's quilt, and the daguerreotype of her parents taken before the war. That night, lying in the narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new town, Delilah allowed herself to remember the reasons she had left Missouri. The man she had been engaged to, respectable and established, who had seemed so perfect until she discovered his cruelty. The way he had controlled every aspect of her life, isolated her from friends, and made her feel small and worthless. The night he had raised his hand to her, and she had finally found the courage to leave, taking only what she could carry and disappearing before dawn. That was 6 months ago. She had worked her way west, taking sewing jobs in various towns, always moving on before her former fiancé could track her down. But something about Bentonville felt different. Perhaps it was the way the townsfolk seemed to mind their own business, or perhaps it was simply far enough from Missouri that she could finally breathe freely. Or perhaps, a small voice whispered in her mind, it had something to do with green eyes and a broken man who needed mending. She pushed that thought away. She had not come here looking for romance. She had come here looking for freedom and safety and the chance to build a life on her own terms. Anything else was a complication she did not need. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Delilah rose early, washed at the basin, and dressed in her second-best dress, a gray calico that looked professional and practical. She pinned her dark blonde hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, then set about creating a sign for her new shop. Her penmanship was good, learned from her mother who had been a schoolteacher. She carefully painted the words Delilah Crawford, seamstress and alterations, then hung the sign outside her door. By the time she finished, several townspeople had stopped to look, and one woman, dressed in an expensive traveling suit, came inside. "You are the new seamstress?" the woman asked, her accent suggesting Eastern breeding. "I am Catherine Morrison. My husband owns the general store. I need a new dress for the church social next month, and my last seamstress moved to Little Rock." "I would be happy to help you," Delilah said, and just like that, she had her first real customer. Mrs. Morrison proved to be particular but fair. She selected a lovely blue fabric from Delilah's samples and described the style she wanted in detail. Delilah took careful measurements and promised to have the dress ready for a fitting in 2 weeks, after Mrs. Morrison left. 3 more women came in, drawn by curiosity and the need for someone who could do fine needlework. By midday, Delilah had 4 orders and felt the first stirrings of real optimism about her prospects, but she had not forgotten her promise to Quincy. During a lull in customers, she prepared a basket with fresh bandages and the small bottle of carbolic acid she always kept for cleaning wounds. Then she rummaged through the trunk where she kept finished pieces and found a man's shirt she had made as a sample of her work. It was simple but well constructed, made from sturdy cotton in a dark blue that would not show dirt easily. The boarding house was quiet when she arrived. Mrs. Porter let her in without comment, merely pointing up the stairs. Delilah climbed to the 3rd door on the left and knocked softly. "Come in," Quincy's voice called, stronger than it had been the day before. She found him sitting up in bed, his back propped against the wall. He had shaved and combed his hair, and someone had brought him food because a tray sat on the chair by the window, its contents mostly eaten. "You look better," Delilah observed, setting her basket on the washstand. "I feel better," he admitted, "though that might have more to do with Mrs. Porter's beef stew than with my constitution." Delilah smiled. "Well, do not discount the value of good food. Now let me see that wound." He unbuttoned the clean shirt he wore, one of his own that was frayed at the collar and cuffs. Delilah carefully unwrapped the bandage and examined her work from the previous day. The wound looked clean, no signs of infection, and it had stopped bleeding entirely. "You have been lucky," she said as she cleaned the area again and applied fresh bandages. "Another few inches and this would have been much more serious." "Luck is a relative term," Quincy said quietly. "Sometimes I think it would have been easier if that bullet had found a vital spot." Delilah's hand stilled. She looked up at his face and saw the bleak honesty there. "Mrs. Porter told me about your wife and daughter. I am very sorry for your loss." "Everyone is sorry," he said, but there was no bitterness in his tone, only weariness. "But sorry does not bring them back. Sorry does not fill the empty places they left behind." "No," Delilah agreed, tying off the fresh bandage, "but giving up on living does not honor their memory either." His eyes snapped to hers, showing the first real spark of emotion she had seen from him. "You know nothing about what I have lost." "You are right, I do not," Delilah said calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But I know something about loss and pain and feeling like the world has ended. I know what it is like to wake up each morning and have to find a reason to keep going. And I know that sitting in a dark room feeling sorry for yourself is the fastest way to let the darkness win." Quincy stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, his lips quirked in something that was almost a smile. "You do not mince words, do you?" "Life is too short for polite lies," Delilah replied. She retrieved the shirt from her basket and held it out. "Here. Your old shirt was beyond saving, so I brought you this. Consider it payment for being my first customer when you bring me your mending." He took the shirt, running his fingers over the neat stitching. "This is fine work." "I know," Delilah said without false modesty. "I am very good at what I do." This time he did smile, a real one that transformed his face and made her realize he was probably only in his late 20s, though grief had added years to his expression. "I believe you. Thank you. You are welcome. Now, do you have any clothes that need mending?" Quincy gestured toward his trunk. "Everything I own needs mending, but I cannot pay you much right now. I lost most of my money in that card game yesterday." "I will work out a payment plan," Delilah said, moving to the trunk. "May I?" At his nod, she opened it and found exactly what she expected. Clothes worn from hard use, buttons missing, seams split, tears that had been ignored for too long. She pulled out several items and examined them critically. "I will start with these," she decided, selecting the worst of the lot. "And you will pay me when you can. But Quincy, you need to find real work again. You cannot drift forever. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, I was a good foreman once. I knew horses and cattle could manage men, could look at a piece of land and know what it needed. But after Sarah and Emma died, I could not seem to care about any of it anymore. I left the ranch and started drifting, doing odd jobs when I needed money, spending it on whiskey when I had it. What changed? Delilah asked. Yesterday, he said simply. I was 3 sheets to the wind, playing cards with money I could not afford to lose. Some drifter accused me of cheating, which I was not, and pulled a gun. The whole thing was stupid and pointless. But when I was lying in that street, bleeding and waiting for someone to either help me or finish the job, I saw your face. And I thought, this is a hell of a way to die, in the dirt like a dog, and what a waste my life has been since they were taken from me. Delilah's throat felt tight. She clutched the bundle of clothes against her chest and struggled to find the right words. It does not have to be a waste going forward. You are still alive, Quincy. That means you still have a chance to make it mean something. Is that what you are doing here? He asked. Making your life mean something. I am trying, she said honestly. I left behind a life that was killing me slowly. Maybe not my body, but my spirit. I came here to find out who I am when I am not being told who I should be. Understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared pain even if the sources were different. Quincy nodded slowly. Then I suppose we are both starting over. I suppose we are, Delilah agreed, which means you need to heal up so you can start looking for proper work. And I need to get back to my shop before I lose any more potential customers. She gathered her supplies and the bundle of clothes, then paused at the door. I will return in 3 days to check your wound again. In the meantime, stay out of saloons and card games. Yes, madam, Quincy said, and there was something in his voice that made her think he actually meant it. Over the next week, Delilah fell into a routine. Her shop opened each morning at 7, and she worked until the light faded each evening. Women came with orders for new dresses, alterations to existing garments, or mending work. She proved herself skilled and reliable, and word spread quickly. She visited Quincy every other day to check his wound, which healed cleanly and without complication. He seemed different each time she saw him, as if the veil of grief that had shrouded him was slowly lifting. On her 3rd visit, he was out of bed and dressed. On her 4th, he told her he had spoken to the owner of the Double R Ranch about returning to work. Mr. Reeves says he will take me back, Quincy reported, but only if I prove I am serious about staying sober and doing the job right. He is giving me a trial month. That is wonderful, Delilah said, genuinely pleased. When do you start? Monday. Which means I need to get these clothes back from you so I have something decent to wear. Delilah laughed. They are finished. I was planning to bring them by tomorrow. She did exactly that, delivering a neat bundle of clean, mended clothes that looked almost new. Quincy insisted on paying her something, and though it was less than her usual rate, she accepted it graciously. You have done more for me than mend my clothes, Quincy said as she prepared to leave. You know that, right? Delilah paused in the doorway. You did the hard part yourself. I just reminded you that you could. Will I see you again? He asked. Outside of me needing your services as a seamstress, I mean. Her heart skipped in an unexpected way. She had been so focused on building her business and settling into this new life that she had not let herself think too much about the way Quincy's face lit up when she arrived, or the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, or the way her own spirits lifted at the prospect of their visits. I would like that, she said carefully. But Quincy, I am not looking for complications. I am not ready for anything beyond friendship. Then friendship is what I am offering, he replied. Nothing more and nothing less, but maybe you would allow me to walk you to church on Sunday, as friends." Delilah considered this. The truth was, she did enjoy his company. Their conversations had grown easier and more comfortable with each visit, and she found herself thinking about him at odd moments during her workday. As friends, there was no harm in it. "All right," she agreed. "Sunday it is." That Sunday morning, Quincy appeared at her door looking scrubbed and respectable in the clothes she had mended. They walked together to the small church at the edge of town, a simple wooden building with a modest steeple and clear glass windows. Heads turned as they entered, and Delilah could feel the weight of curious stares. But Quincy walked with his head high, and she matched his stride, refusing to be cowed by gossip. They sat together during the service, sharing a hymnal and listening to the circuit preacher deliver a sermon about redemption and second chances. Delilah wondered if the man knew his words would resonate so deeply with at least 2 members of his congregation. After the service, Mrs. Morrison approached them. "Miss Crawford, I wanted to tell you that the dress is perfect. You have real talent." "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison," Delilah replied warmly. "And Quincy Wells, I hear you are going back to work at the Double R. It is good to see you getting back on your feet." "Thank you, Catherine," Quincy said. "I am working on it." Other townspeople followed, their curiosity overcome by genuine neighborliness. Delilah realized that Bentonville was the kind of place where people might gossip, but they also gave second chances to those willing to work for them. As they walked back toward her shop, Quincy said, "That was not as terrible as I expected." "People are generally kinder than we give them credit for," Delilah observed. "At least when they are not shooting at each other in the street." He laughed, a real belly laugh that made her smile. "Fair point. Would you like to get lunch? The boarding house serves a good Sunday meal and Mrs. Porter always makes extra." "I would like that," Delilah said. They ate at a small table in Mrs. Porter's dining room, along with the 3 other boarders who lived there. The food was simple but delicious: fried chicken and potatoes with gravy, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily around the table, and Delilah felt herself relaxing in a way she had not since leaving Missouri. After lunch, Quincy walked her back to her shop. They stood outside in the warm afternoon sun, neither quite ready to part ways. "I start at the ranch tomorrow," Quincy said. "I will be out there most days, though I come into town on weekends. Would it be all right if I stopped by to see you?" "I would like that," Delilah said. Then, feeling bold, she added, "Maybe you could tell me about ranch work. I have lived in towns my whole life. I know nothing about horses or cattle." "I could do that," Quincy said, his eyes warm. "And maybe you could tell me more about your life before Bentonville." "Maybe," Delilah said noncommittally. She was not ready to share all of it, not yet, but the fact that she could even consider it felt like progress. The summer days settled into a pattern. Delilah's business grew steadily. She had more work than she could handle some weeks, and she began to think about hiring an assistant. Her little shop became a gathering place for the women of Bentonville, who came not just for her services, but for the sense of community she fostered. Quincy kept his word about staying sober and working hard. Mr. Reeves, impressed by his renewed dedication, made his trial period permanent, and even gave him back his old position as foreman. On Saturday afternoons, Quincy would appear at Delilah's shop, and they would walk together to the edge of town where the land opened up into rolling prairie. He told her about the ranch, about the cycle of seasons that governed a cowboy's life, about spring calving and summer branding, and the long cattle drives that took herds north to market. She told him about the art of creating a dress from fabric and thread, about understanding what a customer wanted even when they could not quite articulate it, about the satisfaction of doing work that made people feel beautiful. and slowly, carefully, they told each other about the scars they carried. One evening in late August, they sat on a fallen log at the top of a hill overlooking Bentonville. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had begun to cool after the heat of the day. "His name was Robert Carmichael," Delilah said quietly, speaking the name aloud for the first time in months. "He owned a dry goods store in Springfield and came from a good family. Everyone thought we were a perfect match. I thought I was lucky." Quincy sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching. He said nothing, just listened as she continued. "At first it was small things. He did not like my friends, said they were beneath me. He thought I should not work, said it reflected poorly on him. I gave up my sewing, gave up my friends, and tried to be what he wanted. But it was never enough. He criticized everything I did, every word I spoke, every dress I wore. He made me feel worthless." Her voice caught, and she felt Quincy's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in silent support. "The night I left, he struck me for the first time. I had burned dinner, nothing serious, but he flew into a rage. I saw my future in that moment, and I knew I had to leave or die there, either from his hands or from the slow death of losing myself completely." "You were brave," Quincy said softly. "I was terrified," Delilah corrected. "I am still terrified that he will find me, that he will drag me back. But I am more terrified of what I would become if I let that happen." "He will not find you," Quincy said fiercely, "and if he does, he will have to go through me first." Delilah turned to look at him, and what she saw in his face took her breath away. It was not just protectiveness or sympathy. It was something deeper, something that made her heart race and her palms sweat. "Quincy," she began, but he shook his head. "You do not have to say anything. I know you are not ready. I just needed you to know that you are safe with me always. Whatever you need, friend or protector or just someone who understands, I am here." "Tell me about them," Delilah said impulsively. "Tell me about Sarah and Emma." Pain flickered across his face, but he did not look away. "Sarah was a farmer's daughter from Kansas. I met her at a barn dance and knew immediately she was the woman I would marry. She had dark hair and brown eyes and the most infectious laugh. She could ride as well as any man and was not afraid of hard work. Emma was born a year after we married, and she had her mother's eyes." His voice grew thick with emotion. "The fever came on fast. Emma first, then Sarah 2 days later. I rode for the doctor, but by the time he arrived, Emma was already gone. Sarah held on for another day, long enough to say goodbye. She told me she loved me, told me to keep living, to find happiness again. I promised her I would, but then I spent 2 years trying to die instead." Tears streamed down Delilah's face. She squeezed his hand tighter. "She would be proud of you now, of what you are doing, how you are trying." "I hope so," Quincy said. "I want to believe that. And Delilah, you should know that I am trying not just for me, but for you too, because you came into my life and reminded me what it feels like to care about tomorrow." They sat in silence as the sun finished setting and the stars began to appear. When it grew too dark to safely navigate the path back to town, they stood and walked together, hands still clasped. At her door, Quincy said, "Thank you for trusting me with your story." "Thank you for trusting me with yours," Delilah replied. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly it made her heart flutter. Then he walked away into the darkness, leaving her standing in the doorway with her hand pressed to her chest. September brought cooler temperatures and preparations for the autumn cattle drive. Quincy would be gone for 3 weeks, helping move part of the Double R herd north. The night before he left, he came to her shop after closing time. "I brought you something," he said, producing a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside, nestled in cotton, was a silver thimble etched with delicate flowers. It was beautiful and clearly not cheap. "Quincy, you should not have spent money on this," Delilah protested, even as she lifted it from the box with reverent fingers. "I wanted to," he said simply. "You have given me so much, and I wanted to give you something in return. Something that reminds you someone thinks you are worth caring for." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. She set the thimble carefully on her work table and then, before she could overthink it, stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Quincy went still for a heartbeat, then his arms came around her, holding her close. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for everything." "When I get back," Quincy said quietly, his breath stirring her hair, "I want to talk, really talk, about us, about what this is between us." Delilah pulled back enough to look up at his face. "I want that too. I am not afraid anymore, Quincy, at least not of this." His smile was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Then that is something to look forward to." He kissed her forehead gently, a promise of more to come, and then he was gone. The 3 weeks he was away dragged by. Delilah kept herself busy with work, but she found herself watching the road north, wondering where he was, hoping he was safe. She wore the silver thimble every day and thought about the way his arms had felt around her, strong and safe. In the quiet of her shop at night, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been fighting for weeks. She was falling in love with Quincy Wells. More than that, she had already fallen. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it filled her with a quiet joy. This was nothing like what she had felt for Robert Carmichael. That had been infatuation mixed with the desire to please and be accepted. This was deeper, built on mutual respect and understanding, and the knowledge of having been broken and choosing to heal anyway. Quincy returned on a Tuesday afternoon, dusty and tired but wearing a grin when he saw her. Delilah was measuring a customer for a new winter coat when he appeared in her doorway. Their eyes met across the room, and the customer, a perceptive woman named Agnes, chuckled. "You go on, dear," Agnes said. "We can finish this later. I think someone is more important right now." Delilah barely waited for the woman to leave before crossing the room. Quincy met her halfway, and this time when they embraced, there was no hesitation from either of them. "I missed you," Delilah said. "I missed you too," Quincy replied. "Every day on the trail I thought about you. About coming back to you." They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other. Then Quincy pulled back slightly and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Delilah Crawford," he said, his green eyes intense and certain. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again, and I know it is fast, but I cannot pretend otherwise. You have brought light back into my life, given me a reason to hope again." "I love you too," Delilah said, the words feeling right and true. "I was so afraid to feel this way, afraid I was making another mistake. But this does not feel like a mistake. It feels like coming home." When Quincy kissed her, it was gentle and sweet, a question and an answer all at once. Delilah leaned into him, letting go of the last of her fear and choosing to trust in this new feeling. They stood in her little shop, surrounded by fabric and thread and half-finished projects. And in that moment, Delilah understood that she had found exactly what she had been searching for when she climbed aboard that stagecoach in Missouri. Not just freedom and safety, but love and partnership and the promise of a future built on mutual respect and care. Over the following months, Quincy courted her properly. He took her to dances at the town hall and brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie. They attended church together every Sunday and ate Sunday dinner at Mrs. Porter's boarding house. The townspeople of Bentonville grew accustomed to seeing them together and approved of the match. In November, on a crisp evening when the leaves had turned gold and scarlet, Quincy asked her to marry him. They stood in the same spot where they had first confessed their love for each other, on the hill overlooking town. "I know it has not been very long," Quincy said, holding both her hands in his. "But I am 30 years old, Delilah, and I have already lost one love. I do not want to waste time being cautious when I know what I want. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and come home to you every night. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Delilah said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Quincy produced a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "My mother gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to a woman worthy of wearing it. You are that woman, Delilah. You are strong and kind and brave, and you make me want to be a better man." They were married in the little church on a Saturday in December. Mrs. Morrison and Agnes stood up with Delilah, while Mr. Reeves and 2 of Quincy's fellow ranch hands stood with him. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause. They moved into a small house on the edge of town that Mr. Reeves helped them purchase, a wedding gift of sorts in recognition of Quincy's good work at the ranch. It had 3 rooms, a front parlor that Delilah converted into her sewing shop, a bedroom, and a kitchen where they ate their meals together. Their first months of marriage were a time of learning and adjustment. Delilah discovered that Quincy sang when he thought no one was listening, and that he had a wicked sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable. Quincy learned that Delilah was a terrible cook, but that she did not mind being teased about it, and that she talked in her sleep, whispering fragments of dreams he could never quite piece together. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their future. Quincy told her about wanting to have his own ranch someday, a small operation where he could raise quality horses. Delilah confessed that she had always wanted to teach sewing to young girls, to pass on the skills her mother had taught her. "We could do both," Quincy said thoughtfully. "Save our money, find a piece of land we can afford, build something together." "Together," Delilah echoed, loving the sound of that word. Their life together was not without challenges. Winter was harsh that year and money was tight. Quincy worked long hours at the ranch, and Delilah's fingers grew numb from sewing in the cold despite the potbelly stove. There were arguments over small things, the kind of friction that comes when 2 people learn to share a life. But they worked through it, always coming back to the core truth that they loved each other and were committed to making their marriage work. Unlike Delilah's relationship with Robert, this partnership was built on mutual respect. Quincy never tried to control her or diminish her accomplishments. Instead, he praised her work and encouraged her to take on bigger projects. In the spring, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had watched Quincy grieve his first wife and daughter, and she worried about what this pregnancy would bring up for him. But when she told him, sitting at their small kitchen table after dinner, his face transformed with pure happiness. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. He knelt beside her chair and placed his hand on her still flat belly. "Our baby." "You are not scared?" Delilah asked. "I am terrified," Quincy admitted. "But I am also hopeful in a way I never thought I would be again. This is not replacing Sarah and Emma. It is honoring their memory by choosing to live and love and build a family despite the pain I have known. They would want this for me, for us." Delilah felt tears roll down her cheeks as she covered his hand with her own. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Quincy replied, leaning up to kiss her. "We are going to be all right, all 3 of us." The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah suffered from sickness for the first few months and struggled to keep up with her sewing work. But the women of Bentonville rallied around her, taking on some of the simpler projects and checking in on her regularly. Quincy rearranged his schedule at the ranch so he could be home more, cooking simple meals and helping around the house. On a hot afternoon in October 1879, after 12 hours of labor attended by the town's midwife and Mrs. Morrison, Delilah gave birth to a son. They named him James William Wells, after both of their fathers. Quincy held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect creature they had created together. "Thank you," he whispered to Delilah. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this." Delilah was exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Watching Quincy with their son, seeing the love and protectiveness in his expression, she knew they had made it through to the other side of their pain and found something beautiful. James proved to be a healthy, happy baby with his father's green eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. He slept poorly and cried loudly, but neither parent minded. Delilah took a break from her sewing work to focus on caring for him, though she still took on occasional projects when customers requested her specifically. Quincy continued working at the Double R, but he spent every free moment with his family. He would come home tired and dirty from a long day, but his face would light up when he saw Delilah and James. He was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a colicky baby in the middle of the night without complaint. When James was 6 months old, Mr. Reeves approached Quincy with a proposition. He was getting older and wanted to start scaling back his operations. He offered to sell Quincy a portion of the ranch's land at a very reasonable price, 50 acres with water access and good grazing. "I cannot afford it," Quincy said regretfully. "You can," Mr. Reeves insisted. "I will finance it myself. You pay me back over 10 years with a small amount of interest. Consider it an investment in a good man." Quincy talked it over with Delilah that night after James was asleep. "It is what we dreamed about," he said, "our own place. But it would be hard work, and we would have to be careful with money for a long time." "I am not afraid of hard work," Delilah said, "and we have survived on very little before. This is our chance, Quincy, our chance to build something that belongs to us." They accepted Mr. Reeves's offer. Over the next year, while Quincy continued to work as foreman, they spent every spare moment preparing their land. They built a small barn for horses and started with just 3 mares and a good stallion that Quincy selected carefully. Delilah resumed her sewing work, now doing it from their home so she could care for James while bringing in extra income. She was talented and had a good reputation, so customers did not mind the extra distance. Life was busy and exhausting, but it was theirs. They built it together, brick by brick, dream by dream. Quincy proved to have a gift for breeding horses, producing strong, intelligent animals that other ranchers wanted. Word spread, and the small operation began to make a profit. 2 years after James was born, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Catherine, after Quincy's mother and Mrs. Morrison, who had been such a support to them. Rose had her mother's blonde hair and her father's determined nature. Quincy was a wonderful father to both children. He taught James to ride almost before the boy could walk and would sit with Rose for hours, letting her small hands explore his face while he sang softly to her. Watching him with their children, Delilah felt her heart expand with love. But she also noticed the moments when a shadow would cross his face, when he would grow quiet and distant. She knew he was thinking of Emma, the daughter he had lost. One night, when the children were asleep, she broached the subject. "You know it is all right to talk about her, about Sarah," Delilah said gently. "They were part of your life. I do not want you to feel like you have to hide that grief from me." Quincy was quiet for a long moment. They sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over their land. Finally, he said, "I dream about them sometimes. In the dreams, Emma is older the age James is now, and Sarah is there and she is happy for me, for us. When I wake up, I feel both sad and grateful." "I think that is how it should be," Delilah said, taking his hand. "They were your family and you loved them. But we are your family now too and you love us. Both things can be true at the same time." "How did I get so lucky to find you?" Quincy asked, pulling her close. "We found each other," Delilah corrected. "Two broken people who chose to heal together." By 1883, the Wells Horse Ranch, as they had named it, was thriving. They had expanded to 15 acres of grazing land and produced horses that were in high demand throughout Arkansas. Quincy had a gift not just for breeding but for training, and he was patient and kind with the animals, never breaking their spirit but working with their nature. Delilah had trained 2 young women from town in sewing, and together they ran a small but successful dressmaking business from the house. She had achieved her dream of teaching her skills to others, and she found tremendous satisfaction in watching her students grow in confidence and ability. James was now a lively 4-year-old who followed his father everywhere and declared he was going to be a cowboy when he grew up. Rose was a precocious 2-year-old who had everyone wrapped around her little finger. The house was full of noise and laughter and the organized chaos of family life. One spring evening, Delilah and Quincy stood together watching their children play in the yard. James was trying to teach Rose how to skip, though she mostly just jumped up and down with enthusiasm. "You remember the day we met?" Delilah asked. "I remember you dropping flat behind a water trough when the shooting started," Quincy said with a smile, "and then marching across the street to help a bleeding stranger. I remember thinking you had the greenest eyes I had ever seen," Delilah admitted, "and wondering what kind of man ended up shot in the street in the middle of the day." "A broken man," Quincy said quietly, "a man who had given up on living. And look at you now," Delilah said, gesturing to their land, their children, the life they had built. "Look at what we have created." "You saved me," Quincy said, turning to face her fully. "You literally saved my life that day, but you did so much more than that. You saved my spirit. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had none." "You saved me too," Delilah replied. "You gave me a place where I could be myself, where I was valued and respected and loved. You made me believe I deserved good things." They stood together in the fading light, 2 people who had found each other in the midst of their brokenness and built something beautiful and whole. James's laughter rang out across the yard, followed by Rose's delighted squeals, and Delilah felt a profound sense of contentment. "I was thinking," Quincy said casually, though she could hear the excitement in his voice. "Mr. Reeves mentioned he is selling another parcel of land, 20 acres adjacent to ours. With the horse sales going so well, we could afford it." "You want to expand," Delilah said, smiling because she knew that tone of voice. "I want to build something even bigger," Quincy confirmed. "Something we can pass down to James and Rose someday, a legacy." "Then let's do it," Delilah said without hesitation. "Together." They purchased the additional land and continued to build their operation. Word of the Wells Ranch spread beyond Arkansas, and buyers came from Missouri and Kansas to purchase their horses. Quincy hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased work, good men who treated the animals with respect and worked hard. Delilah's dressmaking business also expanded. She and her students took on more complex projects, including wedding dresses and formal wear for special occasions. She thought often of the scared woman who had arrived in Bentonville with nothing but a sewing basket and determination. That woman seemed like a stranger now, though Delilah knew she was still there, just stronger and surer of herself. In the summer of 1884, a man appeared at their door. He was well-dressed, riding a fine horse, and he asked for Delilah specifically. She came to the door with Rose on her hip, and her heart stopped when she recognized the face she had hoped never to see again. Robert Carmichael had found her. "Delilah," he said smoothly, removing his hat. "Or should I say Mrs. Wells? I heard you had married. How convenient that you forgot you were already engaged to me." "We were never formally engaged," Delilah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I made it clear I was leaving. You have no claim on me." "I disagree," Robert said, his eyes cold. "You left in the middle of the night like a thief. You owe me an explanation at the very least." Quincy appeared in the doorway behind Delilah, drawn by the tone of the conversation. He sized up the situation immediately, moving to stand beside his wife with his hand resting protectively on her back. "I am Quincy Wells," he said, his voice hard, "and you are not welcome here." "Ah, the husband," Robert said, looking Quincy up and down dismissively. "Tell me, does she flinch when you raise your voice? Does she apologize constantly for things that are not her fault? Those are lessons I taught her well." Quincy's expression turned dangerous, but Delilah placed a hand on his arm. "He is not worth it," she said quietly. "Listen to your wife," Robert said with false pleasantness. "She knows what happens when people displease me." "Leave," Quincy said, his voice deadly quiet. "Leave now, or I will have the sheriff escort you off my property." "I will leave," Robert said, replacing his hat. "But Delilah, remember that you belong to me. You always will. This little Western fantasy you are playing at will not change that." He rode away, but the encounter left Delilah shaken. She handed Rose to Quincy and sat down heavily in a chair, her hands trembling. "He found me," she whispered. "After all this time, he found me. And now he will leave and never come back," Quincy said firmly, settling Rose on the floor with her toys before kneeling beside Delilah's chair. "I will make sure of it." "You do not understand," Delilah said, tears starting to fall. "He does not give up. He will keep coming back, keep trying to control me, to ruin what we have built." "Then we will deal with it together," Quincy said, taking her hands. "Delilah, look at me. You are not that scared woman anymore. You are strong and successful and loved. You have a family and a community that supports you. He has no power here." Quincy was right, but it took several visits to the sheriff and a formal warning before Robert finally left Bentonville for good. The experience shook Delilah badly, bringing up old fears and insecurities she thought she had overcome. But Quincy was patient and steadfast, reminding her every day of who she had become. The children were a balm too, their uncomplicated love and need for her grounding her in the present rather than letting her sink into the past. Slowly, Delilah found her equilibrium again. She realized that facing Robert and standing her ground, protected by Quincy and the life they had built, had been the final piece of healing she needed. She was not a victim anymore. She was a survivor who had chosen to thrive. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. In 1886, Delilah gave birth to another son they named Thomas Charles. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with serious eyes that reminded Delilah of her father. The ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams. They purchased another 50 acres and expanded into breeding cattle as well as horses. Quincy hired more hands and became known throughout the region as a fair and knowledgeable rancher. Men sought him out for advice, and he never refused to help those who asked. Delilah's dressmaking business evolved into a teaching school. She had 4 regular students now, and she had published a small booklet on sewing techniques that sold well in town. She found deep satisfaction in passing on knowledge, in empowering other women with skills that could give them independence. James grew into a responsible young boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. He could rope a calf by the time he was 7 and had a natural way with horses that made his father proud. Rose was creative and spirited, always making up stories and putting on plays for the family. Thomas was quiet but observant, and Delilah suspected he would be the scholarly one. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quincy took Delilah back to the hill where he had proposed. It was December again, cold but clear, and they stood looking out over the town of Bentonville and the land that spread beyond it. 10 years ago, I asked you to marry me in this spot, Quincy said, holding her close against the chill. I told you I did not want to waste time. Best decision I ever made. I was so scared, Delilah admitted. Scared of making another mistake, scared of trusting again. But you were patient with me. You were worth waiting for, Quincy said. You are worth everything. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. So much had changed since that July day in 1878 when Delilah had stepped off a stagecoach with nothing but a sewing basket and hope. She had found not just a home but a purpose, a family, and a love that sustained her through everything life brought. "What are you thinking?" Quincy asked. "I am thinking about how I came here to mend your clothes," Delilah said with a smile. "And you asked me to mend your broken spirit too." "We mended each other," Quincy corrected, "and built something neither of us could have created alone." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found each other in the midst of pain and loss and chosen to heal together. Their journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every difficult step. As they walked back to their house, lights glowing in the windows and children's voices calling out in greeting, Delilah felt a profound sense of gratitude. This life, this family, this love that was so different from anything she had known before, it was real and it was theirs. The years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Seasons turned, children grew, and the bond between Delilah and Quincy only deepened with time. They faced challenges together, from harsh winters that tested their resources to sick livestock that threatened their livelihood. But they weathered every storm side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. In 1890, James turned 11 and began taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. He worked alongside his father, learning not just the practical skills of ranching but the values Quincy held dear, treating animals with kindness, dealing honestly with customers, and taking pride in work well done. Rose, now 9, had discovered a talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the horses and landscapes around their ranch. Thomas, at 4, was starting to show an interest in books and numbers, and Delilah suspected he might become a teacher or accountant someday. The Wells Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in the region. They had 30 horses, a small herd of cattle, and employed 6 full-time ranch hands. The house had been expanded twice, now including a proper parlor, 4 bedrooms, and a dedicated workroom for Delilah's sewing business. Bentonville itself had grown and prospered. The railroad had come through in 1885, bringing new opportunities for commerce and making it easier to ship horses to distant buyers. The little church where Delilah and Quincy had married was now a larger building with stained glass windows donated by prosperous community members. The town boasted a proper school, a bank, 2 general stores, and even a small hotel for travelers. Mrs. Porter still ran her boarding house, though she was nearing 70 now and moved more slowly. Mrs. Morrison and her husband had retired and moved to Little Rock to be near their daughter, but they visited every summer. Mr. Reeves had finally retired completely, selling the rest of the Double R Ranch to a consortium of investors. Though he lived in town and stopped by the Wells Ranch regularly, to see how Quincy was doing with the land he had once owned. Delilah's sewing school had become an established institution. She had taught more than 20 young women over the years, several of whom had gone on to open their own shops in surrounding towns. She took pride in knowing that her students carried her teachings with them, that she was part of a chain of knowledge passed from generation to generation. On a warm spring evening in 1891, Delilah and Quincy sat on their porch watching the sun set. The children were inside, James helping Thomas with his letters while Rose worked on a drawing. It was a moment of quiet domesticity that Delilah treasured. "I have been thinking," Quincy said, breaking the comfortable silence. "James will be 12 soon. Maybe it is time to tell him about Emma and Sarah." Delilah considered this carefully. They had mentioned that Quincy had been married before, but the children did not know the full story. What brought this on? "He asked me yesterday why I sometimes get quiet when I look at Rose," Quincy explained. "He is old enough to understand now, and I want him to know that it is possible to love deeply, to lose terribly, and to still find the courage to love again. I want all our children to know that." "Then we will tell them together," Delilah decided. As a family, they gathered the children that evening after supper. James and Rose sat attentively while Thomas climbed into Delilah's lap, sensing this was important even if he could not fully understand it. Quincy told them about Sarah, about how they had met and fallen in love and built a life together. He told them about Emma, the daughter who had lived for only 3 years before fever took her. His voice broke when he described losing them, and James reached out to take his father's hand. "But here is the important part," Quincy said, looking at each of his children in turn. "When they died, I thought my life was over. I spent 2 years just existing, not really living. And then your mother came to town." He smiled at Delilah, his eyes warm with love. "She saved me, not just my life but my soul. She showed me that it was possible to heal from loss, to love again without betraying the memory of those I had lost. You 3 are proof of that healing, proof that life continues and joy can return even after the darkest times. You still miss them?" Rose asked, her voice small. "Every day," Quincy said honestly. "But I am also grateful for what I have now. Both things are true. I carry Sarah and Emma in my heart, but I live my life with all of you." James was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he said, "I am glad Mother came to town. I am glad she helped you." "So am I," Quincy said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you will ever know." They talked late into the night, answering the children's questions and sharing memories. It was a healing conversation in its own way, integrating the past with the present and making space for all the love that had shaped their family. In 1893, when James was 14, he asked permission to attend school in Fayetteville for a more advanced education. It was a difficult decision for Delilah and Quincy, but they recognized that their son had ambitions beyond ranching. They arranged for him to board with a respectable family and attend the academy there, coming home for holidays and summer months. His absence left a hole in the family, but they adjusted. Rose stepped up to help more around the ranch, discovering that she enjoyed working with the horses almost as much as her art. Thomas continued his studies with the local schoolteacher, proving to have a sharp mind and a love of learning. Delilah found herself with more time as the children grew older, and her sewing students became more independent. She began writing more seriously, compiling her knowledge into a comprehensive manual on dressmaking and running a small business. A publisher in Little Rock expressed interest in printing it, and she spent months refining the manuscript. When The Practical Seamstress was published in 1894, it sold steadily throughout Arkansas and neighboring states. Delilah received letters from women thanking her for the guidance and inspiration. It was deeply satisfying to know that her words and experience could help others, just as she had been helped by the kindness of strangers in her own time of need. Quincy was incredibly proud of her accomplishment. He showed the book to everyone who visited the ranch and kept a copy in a place of honor on their mantle. "My wife, the published author," he would say with a grin that made her blush with pleasure. Their love had matured into something deep and abiding. The passionate intensity of their early relationship transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and unwavering support. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, and still found joy in simple moments together. They still took walks to their hill overlooking town, though less frequently now that their days were full of responsibilities. But when they did, they would stand together and reflect on how far they had come from those early days of broken spirits and tentative hope. In 1895, James graduated from the academy with honors and announced his intention to study veterinary medicine. It was a new field, barely recognized as a profession, but he had a passion for animal health that went beyond simple ranching. Delilah and Quincy supported his choice, understanding that their children would forge their own paths in the world. Rose, now 14, had become a talented artist. Her sketches of ranch life were so detailed and beautiful that a visiting art dealer offered to represent her work in galleries. She was too young yet to pursue it seriously, but the validation of her talent gave her confidence and direction. Thomas, at 9, was a voracious reader who could often be found with his nose in a book. He loved stories of adventure and far-off places, and Delilah suspected he would travel far from Bentonville someday. But for now, he was content to explore the world through books and help his mother with the business aspects of the sewing school, displaying a natural aptitude for numbers. Delilah turned 38 in 1896, and Quincy turned 40. They were both showing signs of age, silver threading through Quincy's dark hair and fine lines forming around Delilah's eyes. But they wore their years well, their faces marked by laughter and hard work rather than bitterness. On their 17th wedding anniversary, Quincy presented Delilah with a gift. It was a new sign for her sewing school, beautifully carved and painted, Crawford Wells School of Needlework and Design. "You have built something remarkable," Quincy said as she admired it. "Something that deserves proper recognition. You are not just a seamstress anymore, Delilah. You are an educator, an author, and businesswoman in your own right." Tears filled Delilah's eyes. "Thank you for always believing in me, even when I did not believe in myself." "Thank you for saving me," Quincy replied, pulling her close. "For seeing past the broken man in the street to the person I could become again." They held each other, two people who had weathered storms and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Their children were thriving, their businesses were successful, and their love had proven itself capable of withstanding whatever life threw at them. The turn of the century brought changes to Bentonville and the Wells family. James completed his studies and returned home as a qualified veterinarian, one of only a handful in Arkansas. He set up a practice serving ranchers throughout the region, and his reputation for skill and compassion grew quickly. He still lived at home, though Delilah suspected it would not be long before some young woman caught his eye. Rose, now 18, had begun selling her artwork regularly. She created beautiful watercolors of frontier life that were popular with Eastern buyers who romanticized the West. She used the income to pay for advanced art instruction and was beginning to make a name for herself. Thomas, at 13, was preparing to follow in his older brother's footsteps and attend the academy in Fayetteville. He wanted to become a lawyer, driven by a sense of justice and a facility with words that reminded Delilah of her father. The ranch continued to prosper under Quincy's expert management. They had expanded their operations again, now running both horses and cattle on 200 acres. It was hard work, but Quincy thrived on it, still rising before dawn and working until dusk, despite being in his mid-40s. Delilah's sewing school was now a fixture of Bentonville. She had trained more than 50 students over the years, and several had gone on to notable success. She had published a second book, Advanced Techniques in Dressmaking, and was working on a third focused specifically on starting a sewing business. She had also begun offering correspondence courses for women who could not attend in person, expanding her reach across multiple states. On a crisp autumn day in 1901, Delilah and Quincy took their familiar walk to the hill overlooking town. They were both moving a bit slower now, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and passing years, but they were healthy and content. 23 years, Delilah marveled, looking out over the landscape. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime. A better lifetime, Quincy said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. I have been thinking about the future, about what comes next. Oh, Delilah prompted, leaning into his warmth. James is established in his practice. Rose has her art. Thomas will head off to school and then law studies. They do not need us the way they used to. They will always need us, Delilah protested gently. Of course, but not in the same way. And I have been thinking maybe it is time to start stepping back from the day-to-day ranch operations. I have good foremen who can handle most of it. Maybe we could travel a bit, see some of the places we have only read about. Delilah was surprised and delighted by the idea. Where would you want to go? I thought maybe we could visit Boston, where your mother's family was from, or San Francisco, see the ocean. Or even just explore more of Arkansas, take our time and not worry about getting back for morning chores. I would love that, Delilah said, smiling up at him. We have worked so hard for so long. Maybe it is time to enjoy the fruits of that labor. They began planning their first real vacation, a month-long trip to visit James's veterinary college and then travel through Missouri to see some of the places Delilah had not been since she left. It felt decadent and exciting, like they were young again. In the spring of 1902, they took that trip, leaving the ranch in capable hands and setting off with just 2 bags and a sense of adventure. They stayed in hotels, ate in restaurants, and explored cities and towns without any pressing responsibilities. They held hands as they walked through crowded streets and quiet countryside, rediscovering each other without the constant demands of work and family. One evening, sitting in a hotel in St. Louis, Delilah said, I have been thinking about what defines a good life. And what conclusion did you reach? Quincy asked, setting aside the newspaper he had been reading. I think a good life is measured not just in accomplishments, but in relationships and impact. We have built businesses and raised children, yes. But more than that, we have created a family built on love and respect. We have helped others through teaching and example. We have shown that it is possible to heal from the worst pain and build something beautiful. We have done that together, Quincy said. Neither of us could have done it alone. No, Delilah agreed. But that is the beauty of it. We found each other when we both needed saving, and we saved each other. And then we built a life that has touched so many others. I regret nothing, Quincy said firmly. Not even the pain that brought us together, because it made us who we are. It taught us compassion and resilience and the true value of love. They returned home refreshed and reconnected, ready to embrace the next chapter of their lives. James announced his engagement to a lovely young woman named Sarah, which gave Quincy pause until he realized it was right that his son should honor the memory of his first wife in his own way. The wedding was beautiful, held at the ranch with the whole community attending. Rose accepted a commission to create a series of paintings documenting life in the Ozarks, a project that would take several years and solidify her reputation as a serious artist. Thomas excelled in his studies and was accepted to law school in Little Rock, making them all proud. As Delilah and Quincy entered their 50s, they settled into a new rhythm. They still worked, but at a more measured pace. Quincy mentored young ranchers and served on the board of the local Stockmen's Association. Delilah continued teaching, but reduced her number of students to focus on quality over quantity. They made time for each other, for their children and growing family, and for the community that had supported them. In 1905, James and his wife Sarah welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Emma Delilah Wells. When Quincy held his granddaughter for the first time, tears streamed down his weathered face. "It is like a circle completing," he said to Delilah later, after they had returned home and were sitting together in their bedroom. "My first Emma never got to grow up, but now there is another Emma who will carry that name forward. It feels like healing." "It is healing," Delilah confirmed, wiping away her own tears. "Life continuing, love persisting, hope renewed." They held each other as they had so many times over the years, drawing strength and comfort from their enduring bond. As the years passed, more grandchildren arrived. James and Sarah had 2 more children, a son and another daughter. Rose married an artist she met in Little Rock, and they had twin boys who were a delightful handful. Thomas married a fellow lawyer, and they had a daughter who showed every sign of having inherited the family's stubborn independence. The ranch remained prosperous, now run primarily by James when he was not attending to his veterinary practice. Quincy still oversaw major decisions, but he had successfully transitioned from active management to advisory role. Delilah's sewing school was now run by 2 of her most talented former students, though she still came in regularly to teach advanced classes and consult on difficult projects. On their 30th wedding anniversary in December 1909, their children threw them a surprise party at the ranch. The house was full of family and friends, people whose lives had been touched by Delilah and Quincy in ways large and small. There were former students of Delilah's, ranchers Quincy had mentored, and countless community members who simply wanted to honor 2 people who had lived with integrity and kindness. Mrs. Porter was there, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack. She pulled Delilah aside and said, "I knew that first day that you were something special. You had grit and heart, and you saved that man's life. Look what you built together." "I could not have done it without people like you," Delilah replied, embracing the older woman. "You gave me a chance when I was a stranger, helped me understand Quincy when I needed guidance. Thank you." As the party wound down and guests departed, Delilah and Quincy found themselves alone on their porch, bundled against the December chill and watching the stars. 30 years, Quincy said wonderingly. 3 children, 6 grandchildren, 2 successful businesses, and countless memories. "It has been a good life," Delilah said contentedly. "The best life," Quincy corrected. "Remember when you said you came here to mend my clothes?" Delilah laughed softly. "And you asked me to mend your broken spirit, too." "Best request I ever made," Quincy said, pulling her close. "You did not just mend my spirit, Delilah. You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me a family and a future I thought I had lost forever." "We did that together," Delilah reminded him. "You gave me safety and love and a place to become who I was meant to be. We healed each other." They sat in comfortable silence, Two people who had shared 3 decades of life together and planned to share many more. The ranch spread out before them, dark shapes against the star-filled sky. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing and their grandchildren playing. "I love you, Delilah Crawford Wells," Quincy said. "I love you too, Quincy Wells," Delilah replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They remained on the porch until the cold drove them inside, but even then, they were reluctant to end the perfect day. They had built something extraordinary from pain and loss, something that would endure long after they were gone. Their love story was woven into the fabric of their family and their community, a testament to the power of choosing hope over despair, connection over isolation, and love over fear. The years continued their inexorable march forward. Delilah and Quincy moved into their 60s with grace, accepting the limitations of age while still maintaining active lives. They were pillars of the Bentonville community, respected and loved for their wisdom and generosity. In 1915, as the world was being torn apart by war in Europe, their little corner of Arkansas remained peaceful. The ranch was now fully in James's hands, though Quincy still rode out most mornings to check on the horses. Delilah had officially retired from teaching, though she still took on special projects and consulted with former students who sought her advice. They spent more time with their grandchildren, who ranged from toddlers to teenagers. Emma, James's oldest, was now 10 and showed signs of becoming a talented horsewoman. The twins from Rose's marriage were 8 and full of mischief. Thomas's daughter was 6 and already reading at an advanced level. Watching their grandchildren grow and thrive filled Delilah and Quincy with pride and satisfaction. They had created a legacy that extended beyond business success or community standing. They had built a family founded on love and respect, passing down values that would continue for generations. On a warm summer evening in 1916, they took one last walk to their hill. They were both in their late 50s now, moving slowly but steadily. They stood looking out over Bentonville, which had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. "Do you remember what this town looked like when you first arrived?" Quincy asked. "Raw and rough and full of possibility," Delilah replied. "Just like we were." "We have had a good run," Quincy said, and something in his tone made Delilah look at him sharply. "What do you mean, have had?" "We still have plenty of years left." "Of course we do," Quincy said quickly. "I just mean we have done well, that is all, built something lasting." But Delilah noticed he was short of breath from the walk, that he moved more carefully than usual. Over the next few weeks, she watched him closely and convinced him to see the doctor, who delivered news they had both feared. Quincy's heart was failing, damaged by years of hard work and the natural wearing down of time. "How long?" Quincy asked calmly. "Could be months, could be years," the doctor said honestly. "Take it easy, avoid stress, and you might have considerable time yet." Quincy did slow down, though it chafed at him. He spent more time sitting on the porch with Delilah, talking about their life together and the children and grandchildren who brought them such joy. He made sure all his affairs were in order, that the ranch transition to James was clear and legal, that Delilah would be provided for. "I am not afraid," Quincy told her one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. "I have had more happiness than most people ever know. I have loved deeply twice in my life, lost one love and found another. I have children and grandchildren I am proud of. I have built something that will last beyond me." "I am not ready to lose you," Delilah said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know," Quincy said gently, taking her hand. "But we both know this day would come eventually. I am just grateful for every moment we have had together." 37 years since I stepped off that stagecoach," Delilah said. 33 years of marriage, it is not enough. It will never be enough. Then we make the most of whatever time remains, Quincy said. We love each other and our family, and we do not waste a single day on regrets. They did exactly that. Quincy lived for another 3 years, years filled with family gatherings and quiet moments together. He saw more grandchildren born and watched others grow. He taught James everything he could about running the ranch and shared his wisdom freely with anyone who asked. In the spring of 1919, Quincy Wells passed away peacefully in his sleep with Delilah beside him. He was 61 years old and had lived a full, rich life, despite its tragic beginning. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire town, testament to the impact he had made. Delilah grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had loved him with everything she had, and she knew he had loved her the same way. Their life together had been a blessing, and though it had ended, the love they shared continued in their children and grandchildren, and in every life they had touched. She continued living in their house on the ranch, surrounded by family and memories. James and his family lived nearby, as did Rose and her husband who had moved back to Bentonville. Thomas visited regularly from Little Rock with his growing family. Delilah wrote a third book in her 70s, a memoir about her life and the lessons she had learned. She called it From Broken to Whole, One Woman's Journey, and it became her most successful publication, touching readers across the country with its honest account of surviving abuse, finding love, and building a meaningful life. She lived to the remarkable age of 83, remaining sharp and engaged until the end. She died in 1941, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, having lived long enough to see the world change in ways she could never have imagined when she first arrived in Bentonville. Her legacy lived on in the thriving ranch, in the countless women she had taught and empowered, in the books that continued to inspire, and most importantly, in the family she and Quincy had built together. Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of how their great-grandmother came to town to mend a cowboy's clothes and ended up mending his broken spirit too, and how together they had created something beautiful and lasting from the wreckage of their pasts. The Wells Ranch continued to operate for generations, a testament to Quincy's vision and hard work. The needlework school Delilah founded evolved but never closed, continuing to teach women valuable skills and independence. And in the small cemetery outside Bentonville, 2 headstones stood side by side. Quincy Wells, beloved husband, father, and friend, and Delilah Crawford Wells, beloved wife, mother, and teacher. But their true monument was not stone and carved words. It was the family that spread like branches from a strong tree, carrying forward the values of love, resilience, and the courage to heal even when healing seems impossible. It was the lives they had touched, and the example they had set of what 2 people can accomplish when they choose love over fear and hope over despair. Their story became part of Bentonville's history, told and retold as an example of the kind of people who had built the town and tamed the frontier. But more than that, it became a love story that proved love could survive loss, that broken spirits could mend, and that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from grand gestures but from simple acts of kindness, patience, and showing up for each other day after day. In the end, Delilah had come to Bentonville looking for freedom and safety, and she had found those things. But she had also found something she was not looking for and did not know she needed. A love that transformed her, a partnership that made her stronger, and a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. And Quincy, broken and lost in his grief, had found his way back to hope and joy through the kindness of a woman who saw past his wounds to the man he could become again. Together, They had proven that it is never too late for a fresh start, that healing is possible even from the deepest pain, and that love, when it is real and true and built on mutual respect, can overcome anything. Their story was proof that sometimes the most broken things, when mended with care and patience and love, become stronger and more beautiful than they ever were before.